Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on Arseblog.com. How are you? I hope you're well, but that's a silly question today because I know how you are. I know in football terms at least you are feeling good because Arsenal are through to the Champions League semi-finals after beating Real Madrid not once, but twice. 2 times in a row, one after the other. There was one win, then there was another win. And the great thing about it is it works both ways. It's like a footballing palindrome. We won the second, and then we won the first. But if you switch it round, as I said, we won the first, then the second. Both of them. Real Madrid did not win either game. Apparently, though, we were only interested in defending. I can see how you might have come to that conclusion, you know, if you're a Real Madrid player. Arsenal, the team that scored 5 goals against the team who were gifted a goal. Basically, William Saliba felt a little bit sorry for Real Madrid. That's what it was. It was like, these poor guys, they got nothing. I'll give them a little taste. And that's all they had to show for 180 minutes plus, of course, with lots of injury time, with this fated forward line of Kylian Mbappe, Vinicius Jr., Rodrigo, and with Jude Bellingham behind them. They were saying on TV last night, they have like 80 goals this season between them. I did the maths on the front three, 65 goals and 28 assists for the front three alone. And what did they have to show for their endeavours against Arsenal? One measly, fluky gift of a goal, and that was it. But hey, Arsenal were only interested in defending. Real Madrid, of course, were more interested in, I don't know, moaning and bleeding and crying and weeping to the referee. Oh, Arby! Rather than actually playing the game. I have to say, like early on when Bellingham fouled Myles Lewis-Skelly, and he took exception to this and had a go at the referee. He was really in the referee's ear, and I felt kind of calmer about things when that happened because it said to me that they were not fully focused on the job at hand, which was winning the football match, scoring goals, and of course producing the famous remontada. That's all you heard about before the game. Remontada this, remontada that. Remontada, my absolute bollocks. That's what I say. And I woke up this morning, right? Because I've been doing Arseblog a long time. My first thoughts in the morning are usually about what I'm going to do, what I'm going to write on the blog. And very often I will wake up with either a theme in my mind, or I'll wake up with maybe the first line of the blog or a point that I would like to make in the blog. That is not at all unusual. This morning, though, I did not have that. I had something else. I had a song in my head, and I don't know where it came from, and I realized this is absolutely absurd and completely silly. But I had to go with where my mind was taking me, and basically this is the song that was going around my head this morning.
Real Madrid thought they'd do a remontada. In the end, what they got was a big load of nada. Next time they're gonna have to try a little harder. Fuck your remontada.
They can absolutely stick that remontada. Well, they can't stick it anywhere because, well, it doesn't exist. It didn't exist. They couldn't make it happen despite their best efforts. Oh, look at us. We're Real Madrid. We're closing the roof. Well done. Well done. My dad's Skoda in 1978 had a sunroof. Think that makes it special? I was chatting to James, who was obviously out in Madrid for The Athletic covering the game, and he was saying wherever he went in Madrid, they were just full of confidence that they were going to do it. They were going to overturn this 3-goal deficit from the first leg. And look, they've done it before, but there is like a sense of entitlement to that in a way. And I recognized it because when I lived in Barcelona, Barcelona fans were exactly the same. This sense of entitlement that they exist on their own special footballing plane and everybody else is sort of beneath them. And obviously the rivalry between Real Madrid and Barcelona is fierce for all kinds of reasons, right? We don't need to get into them. You know, 2 big clubs, the history, the politics, all of it. But something that occurred to me is that part of the reason it is so ferocious is because in terms of the fan bases, at least, they are the same. And they recognize that in each other and they hate it. They can't stand that they are the same. So I was, beyond the footballing thing, absolutely delighted for Arsenal, obviously, but also for the Arsenal fans who travelled out there and probably had to endure that all through the week from the Madrid fans, wherever they were, in their hotels, in the bars and everything else. I think that made it just all the sweeter. One final thing before we get on with today's show. Can I just say to Danny Carvajal, who tried to pick a fight with Bukayo Saka as he was going down the tunnel at halftime, go fuck yourself. I felt like that needed just a little bit of reverb in order to hammer home that point. And I'm sure many of you out there will absolutely agree with me. Reverb or no reverb. Right. A bit later, I'm going to be chatting to Elliot from the Arsenal Vision podcast. We'll chat a bit about the game against Real Madrid, of course, as well, because how could we not? But we'll also hear about the fundraiser this month, the work that the Arsenal Foundation are doing to help some of the most needy people, children in the world, and what you can do to help. So stand by for that. But to kick off and to get into a discussion about last night and the tie overall, I think both legs, is my pleasure to welcome back to the show. He's the co-host of the Stadio Podcast. He's an Arsenal fan as well, of course. It is Ryan Hunn. Ryan, how you doing, man?
I am doing all right, thanks, Andrew. How are you?
Oh, I think I'm doing all right as well, actually. Yeah.
A bit surprised this wasn't the Ipswich preview pod, but it's fine.
That's okay. We're both sort of sitting back in our chairs here, relaxed, feeling good with the world, contented with what football has given us over the last week or so. Well, most of it, but you know, I think when you do what Arsenal have done in 2 games against Real Madrid, I think we all deserve to be in our virtual hammocks with, or well, maybe a real pina colada, who knows, just settling back and basking and just enjoying something that I think, when the draw was made, not too many people thought was going to happen or happen in the way that it did.
Yeah, maybe not the margin.
Yeah.
And obviously hindsight is 2020, but I was a little bit more confident facing Real Madrid than facing Atleti, just because I've said this a few times, but just knowing how Atleti would have just dragged that, well, both ties down to a level that I think Arsenal sometimes struggle with adapting to. I think Porto did it last season, prime example, in a really good way. Real Madrid obviously they are expected to win this competition, so that provides a different dynamic to an opposition. And having watched quite a lot of them this season, they have been vulnerabilities there. I think that's a key thing among quite a lot of big teams in Europe this season, is that there are quite a few vulnerabilities among a lot of those top sides. I think the margin is the surprising thing, and how calm it was over the 2 legs, relatively speaking. Maybe not for us, but in terms of what could have happened and what we have seen Real Madrid do to many, many, many teams over the years. And also sometimes how we've seen Arsenal react in situations of high pressure and various situations like that, as for however long, I don't know. I think the fact that it was so convincing it felt strangely just right. It just felt, because I feel like a lot of people have seen the Arsenal side that a lot of us have been seeing for quite a while. If that makes sense.
Sure.
I think a lot of people who have still really underestimated or not maybe given Arsenal
doorbell.
Doorbell. Do you want the doorbell music?
Well, I'm going to have to get some Ryan doorbell music if you have to go and get that.
I'm so sorry, dude. One sec.
No problem. We've got to get some Ryan doorbell music. Let's see what we can find.
I'm not going to get that.
Okay, that's fine.
Do you know what I think it is? I think that's actually Moose's sweatshirt that I ordered.
Okay, well, there you go. That can wait.
Yeah, sorry about that. Where was I?
I think you were talking about how people might have underestimated Arsenal. Or
maybe we can do a clean cut there. We might not.
No, listen, your production head is on here. We're just going again. It's fine. Okay. We're going to keep going.
I think a lot of people were talking about Arsenal in a way that a lot of us have been talking about them for a while, or seeing an Arsenal that we've seen for a while. I think that there has been a reluctance or maybe just an unwillingness to acknowledge how good Arsenal are over the last couple of years.
Do you think there's maybe been, because of what's happened in the Premier League, and I do want to sort of come back to the overall discussion after we go into some of the nuts and bolts of this game, but, you know, I do think perhaps, and maybe I might have been guilty of this, or people listening might have been guilty of this, that when things don't go your way in the Premier League and you fall below expectations, there's this idea that makes it true of everything, whereas certain competitions can be distinct in the course of a season. That you can, for whatever reason, be not quite as good as you were in one competition, but in another, for whatever reason, whether it's focus, whether it's just serendipity, whether it's, I don't know how it works, that you are sort of at the level that you expect to be. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing from Arsenal this season in the Champions League.
Yeah, I think we got a glimpse of it this week with PSG as well, right? Unbeaten in the league.
Yeah.
But going into a tie against Villa, where especially in the second leg, they were, they kind of did quite well to get away with that, because Villa still had half an hour or so to get another. And I think that quite often than not, we sometimes analyse, or everyone I think is guilty of analysing football occasionally with the removal of context. I think Arsenal's Premier League stuff is separate to the Champions League, because each game in the Premier League is done in a different context. You're facing sides who 9 times out of 10 are looking at an Arsenal game being like, if we can get a point here, this is amazing for our season. It's nothing to do with Arsenal. Whereas then if you take that into a Champions League tie, knockout tie, it's a straight 2-game context. You're going to get different problems, and you're going to have to navigate stuff in a different way, because that's literally all it is. There might not be another 2 games after that. Whereas with the Premier League or any league campaign, every single result is not just going to matter in August. It's going to matter in May. So it gets a bit... You have to do a little bit more shuffling and figuring out and long-term stuff, I think, with league campaigns. Whereas and I think that's why in the Champions League, for example, or any European competition, sometimes you see teams that you might think on paper should breeze through really struggle, because it becomes a straight 2-game matchup thing. It's like a playoff game,
Yeah. Well, look, like I said, I'll circle back around to that, because I do think it's worth discussing what these 2 results and performances say about Arsenal, and say about, where we are and what we're capable of. But I do want to talk about what was, an interesting game. Like the first game, there was a lot going on, not least the fact that in 10 minutes we had a penalty. Team was unchanged from the first leg, which was not unexpected, so we don't need to go into that. But I think there was maybe a show of intent from Arsenal early on. It sort of got overlooked a little bit, that Saka's right-footed shot went only just wide of the far post, and then a couple of minutes later he had a shot which Courtois saved. And then on 10 minutes we have a corner, we get a penalty. Now, I think play was going on. There was a VAR check. Referee went over, had a look. Martin Odegaard stepped up, had the ball in his hands, and as he has done in the past, then handed the ball to Bukayo Saka. Maybe a little bit of mind games, whatever it might be. Can I ask you, please, your gut reaction to what happened when Bukayo Saka took that penalty?
Very thankful this is a podcast you can swear on, because it was... oh, fuck. Oh, fuck, oh, fuck, oh, fuck, oh, fuck kind of thing. It was like, oh, no. Is that gonna be the thing that goes in the Arsenal mega montage of single moments in European games where we're like, that was it. That was really it.
Look, the scene from The Wire. Fuck.
But I think that... I think also, though, the fact that so I think it was interesting that Carlo Ancelotti talked about, he kind of referenced this a little bit afterwards, where he was talking about them needing a moment. And that was my main fear, that was going to be the moment that Real Madrid needed to kickstart the big comeback, right? Which they've been talking about a lot. I said it on Stadio and on Rice actually, but it felt a little bit more like a lot of that comeback talk was for Arsenal, not for them, because it was almost to try and lead Arsenal into contributing to it in some way. And that was my only real thing, was like, oh, I hope that's not the thing that then galvanizes the stadium for it to become really difficult for Arsenal. But I don't think it did. I think it lasted only a few minutes, and obviously I think their penalty is it's like a 2-part thing almost. It's our penalty and their penalty. But I think that it never got. I think Arsenal deserve a lot of credit, and Saka deserves a lot of credit, which I'm sure we'll talk about more later with his goal. But I think the reaction to it was really good in the sense that it didn't look like Arsenal retreated or looked particularly worried. It was just business as usual, stick to the game plan. We've still got a 3-goal cushion. And I think this is where this side is maybe different to previous iterations of Arsenal in that they are able to keep sides at arm's bay a little bit more than in the past when things like this happen. I think it was... I liked what he said afterwards where he did say, I think he was alluding to the criticism, which he's obviously going to get for making that decision in that moment. Clive said something really interesting to us on Wrighty's House where he said the decision to go down the middle was actually correct because the keeper is very, very hyper in that moment in this kind of competition. It was just poor execution, and that's fine. I don't think it's super deep. Maybe not the best choice to do it like that because I think if you drive it, even if you do have it saved, you get away with a little bit more criticism. I thought it was a strange decision because I've never seen him take one like that. But, I guess in that moment, how can you put yourself in the mind of an elite footballer like Bukayo Saka standing in the Bernabeu with 80-odd thousand people screaming and whistling, and you're facing Courtois, and Jude Bellingham's been in your ear before you take the penalty, and I don't really have any issue with that because that's what you should be doing. Every player should be massive.
He's just huge. So this is not the first time, obviously, that I have seen Thibaut Courtois because he played for Chelsea, and I've seen him play loads of times. But in these two legs, it's sort of like, I don't know, he's like 120% version of Thibaut Courtois. They sort of puffed him up a bit. He does look massive. But anyway, back to Saka, he obviously came to a conclusion that this was the best way to score the penalty in this moment. I just think it was a little bit strange. As you said, the execution was not right. It was not right. And that was the main issue, perhaps more than that decision. But I think, like you say, you get away with it. Pick a corner, blast it, hit it low, hit it hard. Even if the goalkeeper gets there, it can squirm underneath him or whatever it might be. And my first thought, honestly, when it was saved was, this feels like such a comeback and bite you in the arse moment. It really did, and I know that's fatalistic and it's just the way football fans operate, but that opportunity to go 4-0 up after 10 minutes, and it's like, oh no, we've missed it. And then, what if they score? But I thought that the first half, we'll come to their penalty in a second, but I thought that the first half and the way it was kind of stop-starty, there was a lot of fouling. Real Madrid were very keen to impress upon the referee their disgruntlement at every decision that went against them. And that actually, as I said, just a little bit of an intro before I start talking to you, was that gave me a little bit of calm because they weren't fully focused on what they had to do. They were more trying to manage the occasion. And I thought what was another fascinating aspect, and maybe this is just me, right? Build up to the game. It is fucking loud. It's really loud in there, and we know what it's like at the Emirates. Everyone is absolutely pumped up for the game. The roof is on, and the sound is bouncing around. And then they did this memoriam thing, which I think sucked some of the energy out of that crowd. And the longer the half went on, I'm not criticizing them for it. I think it worked to our advantage. But you had the people built to this crescendo, and then it was like, okay, stop. Now we're going to play some sad trumpet, and everyone's going to be a bit sad. And then they never quite got going again. And the stop-start nature, the kind of bitty nature of that first half, I think really suited the game that we wanted them to play. And I'll talk to you now about the defensive aspect of it and what way Real Madrid tried to score against Arsenal. But I thought there were all these sort of distinct elements that came together which did not work in Real Madrid's favour in a way that, let's say, last week at the Emirates, everything that we put into that preparation, the pre-game stuff, the noise, the crowd, the atmosphere, it built throughout the game. And it became, in inverted commas, the 12th man. Whereas for Real Madrid, it was like just ebbing away slowly throughout the first half and also the second.
It was a case of just every second counts for them, right? Because when the Mbappe goal goes in and he's miles offside and it's fine, you can see, this was kind of what I was saying, that they really needed a moment, and when they didn't get the moment, it was like, I just never got the sense that they fully believed, truly. They had to publicly say that they believed. But the aftermath of that first leg, to go off topics ever so slightly, Carlo Ancelotti and Jude Bellingham's interviews post-match after the first leg, they looked genuinely like, okay, this is different. This is different because we have been comprehensively outplayed here. And the only thing that they were really hoping on, I think, was that Arsenal would succumb to the aura, you know. When Arsenal didn't, I think everything that you could take away from the Real Madrid performance and the talk before the game and the way that they were acting on the pitch and some of the stuff that they were trying to do, like you were talking about with the referee stuff, I think it was because I don't think they really had a clue how to break Arsenal down, and it all fed into this one thing. And it's funny, actually. I think that it was almost like they succumbed to their own aura, really. They knew how much pressure there would be on them if they went out at this stage, because there's always pressure on Real Madrid when they go out at this stage. I think like Carlo Ancelotti in the press conference after last night was talking about how good Arsenal were, and he did the whole chapeau thing on his post-match. And I think that's a deliberate thing to be like, hey, no, guys, yeah, we are Real Madrid and we've won a load and we're expected to win, but these guys are fucking good. And this isn't a side like Real Madrid comes up against often. You know, I think Arsenal are a lot more complete comparatively to a lot of other sides in Europe than the English press gives them credit for. Which is what I was kind of saying before. I think a lot of people have realised how good Arsenal are. But yeah, going back to what you're saying about the atmosphere, I think, yeah, it's a tricky one, right? Because you want to honour club greats but yet you're kind of in this context of maybe, yeah, that did like pause some of the build-up of what they generated before. And it never really felt... and I think Arsenal deserve a lot of credit here, but it never felt like the atmosphere got out of control.
No, it didn't. And I think as the game went on and as the game progressed and the first half progressed and Real Madrid couldn't find a way through and Real Madrid's approach became obvious, which I'll come to now in a second, I think the belief, again, in the first little bit of this, I was talking to James, you know, when he was out there yesterday, you know, covering the game for The Athletic, and he was saying that everywhere he went, the people were saying, yep, we're going to do it, we're going to do it, we're going to do it. But I think as that first half went on, that belief sapped away because they could see, okay, where we are really strong, Arsenal are making us blunt. I will come to that. Let's talk about the penalty that was awarded to them. I think what's fascinating about this is the recent history of a penalty awarded against Arsenal that pretty much everybody agrees is never, ever a penalty, right? And I'm talking about Myles Lewis-Skelly against Everton. And what we had on that day was an opportunity for the officials to look at what decision had been made and say, actually, you know what? We got that wrong. But they didn't. They doubled down on it, as they often do in the PGMOL and particularly in the VAR booth. And here we had the first one, I think, was an incident that maybe the referee either missed or didn't see fully enough to be able to give a penalty. But when asked to go and look at it, I think it's a stone cold penalty. I don't think you could argue against that being a penalty. If it happens up the other end, we're saying whoever the Arsenal player was really shouldn't be doing what Asensio did on Mikel Merino. In this case, the referee thought he saw something. Mbappe went down, gave a yellow card to Declan Rice, which would have ruled him out of the first leg of the semi-final. VAR had a look. I cannot in any way defend the length of time it took.
No,
it's absolutely,
what are you doing?
It's absolutely wild that it took that. Maybe they were trying to rule out an offside first. I don't know. Yeah. Perhaps. Even so, 5 minutes before they told the referee to go over and have a look, another minute for the referee to have a look. But he came to the right decision. I think it's not a penalty.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not a penalty. And I think when we consider issues that we might have had with officiating, even with that delay, it's so refreshing to see a referee get told by his colleagues, you might have got that one wrong, go and have a look. There's not a lot of contact, there's hands, but it's nothing, players grapple in the box all the time. Mbappe goes down, there's no foul. Have a look, see what you think. Maybe you can overturn it, right? Not being commanded to do one thing or the other. I think he came to the right decision.
I agree, yeah.
Another really interesting aspect of this for me, and I'll let you go on what you think about the process, is that when that decision was overturned, I was expecting that stadium to go berserk. Nothing.
No.
Nothing.
And nothing from the players.
Yeah.
Because I think they knew again.
I think they knew. Yeah.
And there was, I think this. I'm at risk of repeating myself, but it just popped up in that undertone, that kind of underlying lack of belief, which sounds like a bit like a criticism. It's not. I just think it was the reality of what Real Madrid were facing. And it's rare that they come up against that. I think that the fact that when the penalty was overturned, there wasn't a lot of kicking off from the players.
No.
There wasn't this great sense of injustice. Ancelotti mentioned it after the game, but very much in the context of like, that's something we needed. That we needed a moment. He kept saying that. And I think we had it with the penalty. It was taken away. He didn't say like whether it was right or wrong necessarily. I didn't see him criticize the decision to overturn it. He criticized the process or referees going to VAR, but he didn't necessarily say he would disagree with it. I think also maybe you have to throw in a bit of that as a manager, a Real Madrid manager specifically who's going to have a competition. You have to throw in a slight bit of just like,
sure,
well, if the penalty happens. But I think the fact that it wasn't a major talking point proves that it was the right decision to overturn it. Yeah, the process took forever, but I think if you take the time aspect out of it, that's kind of how we imagine VAR to work, right? Yeah, the ref gave a decision and they thought they were quite definitive in it and booked Declan Rice. I think that the speed of the booking was the most surprising.
For me as well. Yeah,
so it was a bit like, come on, man. And then, the thing I did enjoy the most about it was Declan Rice afterwards saying, "Listen, I was talking to Mbappe and Vasquez, and I said, if it's a penalty, I would tell you it's a penalty." I was like, "Come on, man! Like, I'm an honest guy," kind of thing. Champions League quarterfinal second leg, you're going to be like, "Actually, yeah, I did bring him down. Yeah. Give it." But no, I think the right decision. The length of time was just obscene. And again, another. I think this might be if I was a Real Madrid fan this morning, I'd probably be looking. The most disappointing thing about it, I would think, is that they did have those opportunities to ramp it up. They had a few and just never really seemed to capitalise on it. And I do wonder if that was just because of Arsenal's setup, and just Arsenal not letting them really get away. They're not, I think when you're used to kind of players rolling over or getting past a fullback a lot easier than you are against Myles Lewis-Skelly or you're in Timber, and you've had at that point, what we're like half an hour in, you've had 2 hours in the last week or so of not getting any joy. Or if you have, you've had like one moment. That you start to run out of ideas a little bit.
Yeah, I guess it goes, becomes a little bit of a weight on your mind. You know that, okay, well, here we go, 90 minutes plus another half an hour. And we've got you get to halftime as well. I think the thing you mentioned there about Arsenal's setup is what's really interesting about this game, because Real Madrid have been criticised a lot for just crossing the ball, which I get, right? They've got Vinicius Jr. and they've got Kylian Mbappe and they've got Rodrigo and they've got Jude Bellingham. They've got these players who are so potent and so capable when you get them into the final third. But yet here they are, slinging in crosses, cross after cross after cross. William Saliba, by half-time, had made 10 clearances. A typical Premier League game, a big game for a centre-half, you might see 6, 7, 8, perhaps. By half-time, he had 10 on his own, and there were other players who contributed in that regard. So, there is, on the one hand, some criticism to be made of Real Madrid for a paucity of ideas. 43 crosses in the game last night, 0 through balls. And you're playing with Kylian Mbappe up front and you're thinking, well, how do we make Kylian Mbappe effective? It is not by A, crossing it to him, or B, giving the ball to him in areas where he's the guy putting in the crosses. But I think what it takes away, if you're just criticizing Real Madrid, it takes away from Arsenal's game plan. Because I am absolutely sure that this was part of the setup, part of the preparation, part of the organization for this game was to prevent Real Madrid doing the things that they are best at, and instead forcing them into hit and hope, Hail Mary crosses. I think Arsenal and Mikel Arteta and his coaching staff, the players obviously for carrying out that game plan, but Mikel and his coaching staff deserve a huge amount of credit for looking at Real Madrid and essentially over the course of not one game, but 2 games, nullifying them to the point where, you know, we have nonsense where Lucas Vazquez is coming out afterwards and saying, well, Arsenal only wanted to defend. Well, we scored 5 goals, mate, and you got 1 lucky one.
And they weren't smashing. It wasn't a smashing.
They weren't smashing crap. Well, I mean, maybe the free kicks, you could slightly categorize them as that because of the unexpected nature of them, but the high quality of those free kicks, you know, is the converse of that. But what's so interesting is that Arsenal's defensive discipline and shape and organization was such over the course of these 2 games that Real Madrid, the great Real Madrid, with these incredible players they have, were just banging their head against a wall over and over and over again. And it's not a quality issue. It's the fact that Arsenal completely and utterly negated their qualities. For me, anyway. I'm curious as to what you think.
I think Arsenal did do that while also not ignoring their own strengths and going and winning a game, which was a really difficult balance to strike. And I think Mikel Arteta deserves a huge amount of credit, and the players deserve a huge amount of credit for the work that they've done over the last couple of years to get into a position where you don't have to abandon your desire to go and win a football match in order to prevent Real Madrid from scoring. I don't think this was a performance that warranted a comment from an opposition player saying, "Oh, they didn't do anything in the first half." I think that's actually incorrect, because I think Arsenal did what they needed to do. There was a lot of stale possession from Real Madrid, and it was noticeable that when Arsenal did get the ball back, how much more intent there was and purpose with the possession that Arsenal had. They moved Real Madrid around a hell of a lot more than Real Madrid moved Arsenal around. I think Real Madrid deserve quite a lot of credit actually for how they dealt with Arsenal's set pieces, because they weren't really a factor, I don't think, in the game. We didn't really seem to cause Real Madrid many problems from corners, and Courtois was a big. Apart from the penalty, but on the whole, I think that they did pretty well. But I'm a bit confused as to... So the crossing thing was so frequent that it must have been a tactic. It must have been a deliberate message, and there must have been a reason for it. And I'm trying to figure out what it was. And I'm wondering whether they maybe thought they maybe identified Kiwior as a potential weak point, but just purely because he's not Gabriel. But he's not exactly like a small dude. Kiwior is a big dude. So I think Clive said something interesting where he said, it's a bit of a cop-out when you just cross balls in games like that, because you kind of get away with any potential criticism of not making that pass or making the wrong decision. It's like if you display an intent, then it's quite often like, oh, no one's got on the end of that ball, or oh, someone needs to do better, or we need to get players in the box. So maybe there was a bit of okay, I can't really do anything here. The ball in the box might be the one. Maybe we'll get a break, or maybe it was a deliberate thing the only thing I can think of, because I don't think, Carlo Ancelotti is no clown, right?
Of course not. No.
And the only thing I wonder was whether they were maybe like, listen, these guys are so organised. If we're not going to beat them on transition, we might be able to just scramble something in the box. The ball falls to Jude Bellingham. Jude can smash one in from 8 yards, and we've got a scrappy goal, and we're back in it. And I think that's it. I think that was the tactic, as opposed to deliberately being like, we're going to get headers.
Sure. I think the other aspect of it for me as well, I think, is that they were terrified of Sackett and Martinelli. You had Lucas Vazquez, who's 33 at right back. You had David Alaba, brilliant player in his day, but at 32, long time out with injury, playing at left back. And I'm sure he would much rather have been playing at centre half. So what they didn't do was commit their fullbacks, so they couldn't overload in the wide areas. It was down to Vinicius or Rodrigo to do something special, rather than combining with players in those areas to create overloads, a little give and go, get into the box. So I'm not saying it was easy for Myles Lewis-Skelly and Jurriën Timber, both of whom I think played brilliantly well. Timber against Vinicius was like a talking point when this draw was made, was one of the things that I was really, really looking forward to see how Timber would deal with Vinicius Jr. And I think over the course of 2 legs, there's only one winner there. He's
amazing. He's amazing.
Incredible, like absolutely brilliant. The one-on-one defending is brilliant. Myles Lewis-Skelly doing what he did at 18 years of age. We could go through the team front to back and top to bottom.
I honestly could do every podcast just talking about
Myles Lewis-Skelly.
Just doing an hour-long breakdown of Myles Lewis-Skelly.
It is amazing. It is amazing.
He's incredible.
There's incredible. There's a personality, a confidence, a belief in him that, it's not normal. No. I'm not saying it's not natural, but it is not normal. It's special, I think is probably the right way to put it. And I think he demonstrated that again last night.
Can I just, maybe I'm jumping ahead of your plan, so apologies if so.
No.
I wanted to, while we're talking about Myles, can I just throw in Jakub Kiwior as well? Because that left-hand side was the same left-hand side that we finished the game against Liverpool with at home.
Yeah.
And it looked like a bit all over the place.
Sure.
And now I think Kiwior deserves some sympathy there, because he had a great run in the side last season at left back. And I think being out of the side for a little while and then being dropped back in, it can be tricky. Myles was very, very, very early on in his Arsenal career there, and he'd just come on as a substitute, I think, right? And then that was when Saka got in. There was a lack of communication, a lack of a relationship maybe. To see how that has developed, if you said after that game, right, Arsenal are going to go to the Bernabeu in April, those two are going to play in that on that side, and Arsenal are going to win the tie 5-1.
Yeah.
Can you be like, yeah, all right, man. Yeah, all right. Like there's hope, and there's that.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think the pair of them, Myles we've talked about so much. You have, I have, everybody who is an Arsenal fan has. But I think it was so calm over the 2 legs. And I think I was talking to you. Anyone who would talk to me about this game before, I was just like, just keep it fucking boring.
Yeah.
As boring as possible. I would take I said to Moose yesterday, I want to be scrolling on my phone after an hour because it's so dull.
So dull, yeah, boring.
And it wasn't, but
no.
I think those two over the 2 legs have kept that side. Like, I haven't seen Rodrigo that quiet for a very long time, especially in successive games.
I think you're right about Kiwior. When you lose Gabriel, and he's such an iconic player, totemic sort of player for Arsenal, and you lose him ahead of games against Real Madrid and the reputation and the history and the aura, it's hard not to worry. And look, Kiwior has had some iffy moments here and there. I think generally speaking, he's been fine for Arsenal, but that life of the backup centre half is one of the most difficult positions to fill in football, because when there's a central defensive pairing there, they play all the time. When there's an obvious 1 and 2, they play all the time. You're always going to be the guy who doesn't play, who's coming in cold, who doesn't develop in the same way that the guy like Gabriel did. I made this point a couple of weeks ago where they both arrived at Arsenal at the same age. Gabriel got in the team and stayed in the team and has played and played and played and played and developed into this incredible defender, whereas Kiwior has played a bit, at centre half. There was a period where people were saying, well, it's hard to judge, Kiwior because we haven't really seen him play at centre half. Most of his football has been a left back, and I think he was, for understandable reasons, not necessarily to make it personal, but perceived as a weakness because, as you say, he's not Gabriel, but I think he deserves massive credit over the course of these 2 legs for being part of what was, 2 of the greatest collective performances in recent Arsenal history, and he played a part. And I think we have to sometimes recognize that the job of a squad player is tough.
Yeah.
It is tough, and maybe we need to give them, a little bit of rope from time to time when we're analysing their ability and their suitability to be part of the squad,
Yeah, for sure. And I think also how important that was maybe for the partnership with William Saliba.
Yeah.
They looked like they were really. It looked, the way that they were congratulating each other.
Yeah,
they were
that
kind of
bit where
tackles and stuff, and it was very and also, you look across that back line. Kiwior was the senior member of that back line. He was the oldest player in that back four.
That's mad, isn't it?
And so, maybe I'm kind of looking too much into it, but there were moments in terms of how he was conducting stuff or what he was doing in the little breaks of play where I was like, wow, this feels like you're stepping up into like, oh no, I've got this while Gabriel's away. I can play this role.
Yeah.
And that's also really important for Myles because, as much as he doesn't need babysitting at all, we've got to remember that he is still very, 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 very young, and he still needs guidance and leadership in that side during games. And I think seeing Kiwior, it felt like a real step last night. And that's not to say that he was, he wasn't good or anything, but I feel like it was a bit more like players need to feel like they belong as well, and that they need it. I think it must be so hard for you.
Sure. When
you kind of step out and then you come back in, you're like, fuck, everyone's doubting me. But then you've kept one of the most potent front threes super quiet in 2 games.
Yeah.
And you are the eldest member of that back four.
That's crazy.
That's got to feel great for him. And I'm really, really happy for him because there is definitely, you cannot win titles without players like that. And we've all talked about this over years and years and years. And we've got to a point where I think it might have been you and I, we were talking about this either last time or the time before, where we know you've kind of made it or you're getting good when players only have to really miss 2 or 3 games and the whole fan base is like, I think this team has moved on.
Yeah. I mean, it's the Pascal Segan effect in a way. Look how many games Pascal Segan played in the Invincible season, or think about an incredible night against Inter Milan, the 5-1 against Inter Milan. Pascal Segan was playing that. So you need these players. You've got to have these players. I do want to move it on a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
I think Kiwior deserves credit, and I hope it is a step in a confidence boost, and I think it is a step overall, but I want to come back to that. Let's return to a certain Mr. B, Saka, where having missed that penalty, I'm not saying you would forgive someone for being a bit, oh, fuck. But I think what we've learned about Bukayo Saka over the years is that he does not in any way let his head go down. He is capable of dealing with difficult moments in the most positive ways, and that was evident then when we scored what I think is a really, really good goal. It starts with him out on the right-hand side. All of a sudden, Martin Odegaard, who was a bit quiet maybe in the first half, his connections started working again in the second half. He picks it up, combines with Declan Rice, gives it to Mikel Merino. Rudiger is probably thinking about who he's going to headbutt next, rather than thinking about where Bukayo Saka is. Saka makes the run, he points, Merino plays a perfect pass, the dink over Courtois is brilliant. It's 1-0 to the Arsenal, and it's just a really, really, really good goal. High quality, high mentality, just brilliant.
Yeah, Bukayo Saka's movement for this is incredible, and just the patience and just not forcing it. An absolute perfect example of an attacking player who can really, really dominate, but is actually just leaving it to other people to do it, and will be like, I'm just going to wait for the game to come to me in this passage of play, and when it does, I'm going to finish it off. Just a great goal, a really good goal, and something Real Madrid never really could carve that kind of opportunity out over the 2 legs. And I think that was a major difference, and that's the thing. I was talking about Arsenal maybe being a little bit more complete than people give them credit for. That came from a period where you're looking. It was looking a little bit like a transition. A lot of people that just drove into the box there, and being that good in one-on-ones and acknowledging the situation, being like, okay, maybe this isn't the time to do it. takes a hell of a lot of maturity and selflessness in a wing, especially in a winger. Like, how many wingers have we seen just be like, I'm going to do this and this and this and just try and get a shot away, and then just patiently kind of like, kind of almost like stealthily move his way across the box and wait for the ball to come to him. It's just a really good finish. It's actually it's like prime centre forward movement.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's just absolutely brilliant.
I think that's an interesting thing with the Moreno dynamic up front, is that it's allowed him to withdraw a little bit, and they've done something quite smart, I think, with Martinelli coming back and Saka coming back, and Martinelli's form being quite good as well. I think he looks like he's developed a little bit of it. We'll maybe talk about for the goal, but I think he's developed with the timeout as well. And that little dynamic I think Real Madrid struggled with it over the two legs a lot of the time, because they were just like, I don't really know who to go with.
Yeah.
And what to do a lot of the time. But yeah, great goal and a great example, I think, of how Arsenal did move them around quite consistently over both legs.
Yeah, 4-0 then on aggregate, and I was feeling good. I'm not saying I was massively worried when they scored, but it did unsettle me because of how quickly the goal came afterwards. I don't know that we need to analyze this in any great depth. Some people will say maybe Raya shouldn't give the ball to Saliba there, but this is how we play. This is what we do. This is how we do it. This is how we've been effective. And if there's a player in the world or a player in this team that you would feel confident about giving the ball to in that area, it is William Saliba. However, he does make a mistake, a very uncharacteristic mistake. I think this, in some ways, sums up the tie for me, in that the only thing Real Madrid got was from a mistake that I doubt you will see again from William Saliba it might happen once every 3 years, if that. And that's the only way they could make a breakthrough. And I think that tells you a lot about the performance of Real Madrid, but also Arsenal. Like, I prefer not to concede, but if I want to look at it now in a way that makes me feel better, that's the way I look at it.
I also don't think that happens if we don't score like a minute before.
Yeah, probably not.
I think it's just a slight over relaxation, maybe. I think that extra, like having scored the goal and having that extra buffer, I think it's very, very easy just to slightly switch off, or put the intensity down momentarily, and you rarely get caught out for it. I don't think Raya probably should have given the ball there. There wasn't a lot on, even if when the ball did come to him. But yeah, I mean, it's the great thing about this tie is that so often we've had to discuss and dissect moments like a missed penalty, or conceding a sloppy goal to an error, or maybe having a penalty decision, like you mentioned before, that we were a bit like, in the sense of, well, if only, or like, what if that hadn't happened? And oh, wow, could we have done X, Y, and Z? And it's just really cool to be able to discuss them all in a positive way, or with a positive outcome, and also them not be moments of luck, or Arsenal not kind of escaping or anything. I think it was a rare error and a rare lack of concentration, but if that's the only real thing that you can nitpick at in terms of Arsenal concentration and performance over the two legs against Real Madrid, then I'm fine with that.
Well, I think another thing that really sums up the tie for me is the fact that in the first game, Arsenal ran a total of 114 kilometres to Real Madrid's 101 kilometres. Wow. And last night, it was 118 kilometres from Arsenal, 108 for Real Madrid. So you're looking at 23 kilometres over the course of two legs. Football is obviously not all about running, right? It's not all about running. It's what you do with the ball, but it's also how you prevent the opposition doing what they want to do with the ball, which comes back to what we were talking about earlier. And, a lot, I imagine, if you were to analyze some of that running, there's a lot of shuffling sideways and getting back into position and making sure that transition moments don't happen in the way that they usually do when Real Madrid play, right? So that was, I think, a big part of it. Arsenal were smarter and worked harder. And I think when you work harder than the opposition in football, more often than not, you get the result, even if there is a deficiency in, well, not a deficiency, that's the wrong way to put it, because it's doing our guys a disservice. Even if maybe there is a little bit of a gap in quality where I think Real Madrid, probably in the forward line, people might say, had the better of the two squads, right? But they didn't work hard enough to make the opportunities that they needed to work, or needed to make. And then the goal that won the game for Arsenal, it's a cross, it's cleared, it comes to Mikel Merino, and Gabriel Martinelli, who was relentless yesterday, tireless, the running he did up and down that left wing and beyond, in the 93rd minute is making a sprint from 25 yards, 30 yards inside the Arsenal half, all the way through. The ball from Merino is excellent again. Martinelli gets goal side of the defender. I'd have some questions to ask about my defender's positioning there when the ball was going through, but take nothing away from Martinelli. Clips the ball past Courtois, 2-1. Cue mayhem in the stands and everywhere around the world, people watching, I'm sure. But that, again, is another piece of why Arsenal won this game, because they had players who were willing to do the hard yards that Real Madrid players just did not do. They put so much more effort into moaning at the referee than they did actually the basics of football. And I think over the course of the two legs, that was a part of why they were, if you want to say they were below par based on what people would have expected from them, I think that's a big reason for me.
Yeah, I think when you have that amount of quality, you can win stuff, right? We saw it last season. I don't think that maybe they were the best team in Europe last season, but they got past they got through that Man City tie, and they were, they really dug in there. That was a real kind of hang on, and if we get through this, we're good kind of thing. But they have that muscle memory, right? They just never know when they're beaten, really. So you have this amount of quality in a side. You're going to just win games. You're going to beat sides, and especially if you're a side like Real Madrid, like we've talked about. A lot of people play the badge. It's quite cliche, but it is true. It can be quite overwhelming playing Real Madrid, especially in the Bernabeu. I think when you have a side like Arsenal, who I can't remember who it was last season. It was it might have even been Thomas Tuchel. I might be wrong, but there was a manager, and I don't think it was a Premier League manager. It was someone in Europe who said there. Something like Arsenal, a few teams can hurt you in as many ways. I think that's a really key thing in that, Arsenal aren't one-dimensional; they're multi-dimensional, and they can do multiple things in such a quick succession in a game that it's quite hard. It can be really hard to play against, even if you have the quality that Real Madrid do, and they don't have that. They don't have that, for example. That ability to just be like, right, actually, if this isn't working, we're just going to switch and do this, because there's so many, they're back in their Galactico era where I think a lot of players don't want to do that kind of stuff. They want to go to Real Madrid and they want to strut a bit and they want to kind of just be like, yeah, I'm going to play in Real Madrid and I'm going to win and we're going to score goals and all this kind of stuff. When you have this combination of technical brilliance, because if you go through that Arsenal lineup, there are some of the best players in the world in that squad now, and in that starting 11. Like, if you're going to talk about Bukayo Saka, there's an interesting thing about Bukayo where I'll maybe save it in a little bit because it's a slightly off topic, but you have players who would be in a side that you would see in the Champions League and be like, wow, fuck, they're good. Yeah, they're really, really good. And if you combine that with the tactical flexibility and stability that Arsenal have, and the belief, it's a really, really, really difficult thing to beat, even if you're Real Madrid. And I think that the Premier League's wealth has created a situation where a lot of Premier League sides don't need to be as intimidated by some of the European giants, because the financial gap has closed so much on that. There's still like Real Madrid record, revenue and all this kind of stuff, but there's a reason why Florentino Perez was going so hard on the Super League. And a lot of those, we all know Barcelona's financial situation in the last however long. Like, a lot of those clubs are struggling to keep up with the Premier League. While that's a conversation for another day, you see it on nights like last night, where the ties like this, or Villa against PSG. Like, Villa were in that tie. Probably should have at least taken it to extra time in the second leg. it's a lot more. I think Premier League clubs are sometimes a lot more closer than they think they are because of the reputation of those European giants. And just again, like I know, I'm sorry I'm repeating myself, but just last night I think you saw that when the individual quality isn't enough, and you can't really turn to something else because it's like every avenue you're running down is a bit of a dead end. It doesn't come apart, but it stops being effectual quite quickly. Sorry, that was a massively long-winded answer, but
before I just wrap things up, because I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm
good. We can go all day if you want. Like
all day, but we've got to get the podcast out to people. That's the thing. The people will be looking for the podcast. You talk about individual quality, and we've mentioned specific players. And I said earlier we could go from back to front and give people their flowers, but Declan Rice in these 2 games, I think, has been phenomenal. The first half of this season, clearly he had a post-Euros hangover, some injury issues, some fitness issues. And I saw people question that. I saw people question him and question his role in the team. And I get it. There's a short-termism in football. You're only as good as your last performance, is the old cliche. If that's true, how good is Declan Rice on the basis of not just his last performance, but the 2? I think what's so fascinating to me is that he was probably our man of the match in the first leg for very, very obvious reasons, because he scored 2 of the greatest free kicks you will ever see in succession. Whereas last night, I think he was just immense in slightly different ways. When we talk about that, the difficulty that Real Madrid had in exposing Arsenal centrally, the 0 through ball stat, I think he made more interceptions last night than anybody else. And I think there are other players obviously in that team. Everybody worked really, really hard, but sometimes a guy just stands out and steps up and is just a little bit extra. Like if everybody last night from an Arsenal perspective was 9 out of 10, not everybody was, but like if that's Declan is 9.5, just that little bit extra.
Yeah, I think last night was an interesting one because it felt very captain-y. Felt like he was the first on the scene to everything.
Sure, I know what you mean. Giving bollockins for yellow cards that shouldn't have, that were silly, or talking with the opposition, or just kind of a very lead by example performance. I think it's been quite interesting that he seems to have been really freed up since he's moved into this slightly advanced position a little bit more regularly. And I do wonder whether, not wanting to loop everything back to Myles Lewis-Skelly, but I do wonder whether Myles' ability to move into midfield and kind of control tempo a little bit more than we would probably expect an 18-year-old midfielder who's been starting at left back to do so early in his Arsenal career. And also to drive, like Myles' ability to drive as well, takes a little bit of the need for Declan Rice to do that all the time away. Completely agree.
So I think there's just Myles' emergence has allowed, and I think what's really key about this is that Declan Rice is quite keen to point this out, which I think is really interesting. He doesn't need half an excuse to big up Myles Lewis-Skelly. And sometimes players can tell you a lot about what's going on at a club if you just pay a little bit more attention to who they big up and what they say. When Kai Havertz was getting so much shit, they were all like, no, seriously, like, we need him in this team. And if players are telling you that, then maybe you need to kind of rethink your critique about certain players. But yeah, I think that it's all about these. I think we sometimes, all maybe underestimate combinations and the importance of combinations and how much, if you take one player out of a side, that's why injuries can be so impactful. It's not just losing that individual; it's losing the combinations with other players. And obviously, I would have rather had a season where we'd had a fully fit Ben White and a fully fit Martin Odegaard and a fully fit Bukayo Saka all year.
Yeah.
But maybe losing that triangle down that right-hand side for various points this season gave Mikel Arteta almost like a necessity to shift the focus onto how we handle that left-hand side, because we were when teams were shutting us down on that right-hand side, we did look a little bit stuck sometimes. Now that they've figured out a solution, and now you've got you've got Jurrien Timber down the right-hand side now, but you've got Bukayo Saka back and Martin Odegaard back. That is an absolute nightmare. Like, where'd you go? Like, as an opposition defence or as an opposition manager, like, who'd you try and shut down? Because if you shut down one side, you now got Declan Rice, who's kind of freed up and able to roam a little bit, which I think suits him. I think it suits him a lot better when he doesn't have to just sit and be, here, and here. He's got such an engine that he can kind of go wherever he needs to go, and I think that he enjoys doing that.
Yeah,
and just his evolution definitely in the second half of this season, I think is so encouraging for the team as a whole. And it's exactly the kind of player that we thought we were getting, I think. And to see him level up like that, and just especially against Real Madrid in 2 ties, there are like emergence games, right, where players that are really, really good, and they've done it on various levels before. Like, he's been to Euros, and he won the Conference League with West Ham, which was so huge for that club. But then, quarterfinal, second leg, away at Real Madrid, and you're just like, it's no bother, really.
Yeah.
That's such a big statement. And I just had one thing I loved after the game was when he got awarded his Player of the Match trophy.
Yeah.
And he was just like, back to back.
Back to back. I thought it was interesting to hear him talk about how they knew we knew we were going to win. We had the belief we were going to win. I think this maybe is a discussion that I might have maybe on the preview podcast with Lewis tomorrow, because we're kind of running out of time. But the way Mikel Arteta has instilled in this team a belief that even with the problems, even with the injuries, the way he's talked about injuries this season and hasn't said, oh, woe is me, I don't have Bukayo Saka, I don't have Gabriel Jesus, I don't have Martin Odegaard, I don't have Kai Havertz, I don't have this guy, I don't have Ben White, I don't have Calafiori, I don't have these guys. He never once said this was a problem. And it clearly was, and it evidently was in some of the performances that we had. But what he did, I think very cleverly, was publicly talk about this being a challenge for him, a challenge for his coaching staff, and a challenge for the players to overcome. And I don't think we get what we got last night from that team without them having sort of navigated that, if that makes sense, But again, this is maybe a bit of a complicated discussion, because I just want to finish on this. At the start of this season, when I thought about what might constitute success for Arsenal this season, I thought we were a team that was way more capable of winning the Premier League than the Champions League. Because we'd come close, because we knew, how to get to a certain point. Whereas in Europe, we for a club of our size, we haven't had that history. And that was interesting to me in the build-up as well, where Arteta talked about creating history, writing history. You've only been here once or twice. We need to keep doing this and keep improving, etc., etc. So there is that track record to get on top of. Obviously, Premier League is not going to be ours this season, but we now have this chance at European success. And I looked at these 2 games against Real Madrid as the team demonstrating an ability to be taken seriously as potential Champions League winners. Whereas I think even earlier in the season, people would have scoffed at that. There's no way Arsenal could do that. I'm not saying we will. Obviously, I hope we do. But I think what we've seen from this team demonstrates that they could potentially do it, that it is within their ability to do it. Whereas I don't think it has been for quite some time. And I think when we talk about belief, when we talk about, what this team thinks it can do, the messaging that's come out over the course of, pre the first game, after the first game, pre the second game, after the second game, they believe that they can do it. And that is such a cornerstone of actually going and doing it. Because why have Real Madrid done it so many times? Is it because every season they've had the best team? No. Have they had brilliant players? Yeah, absolutely. But have they always believed that they can do it? I feel like I've told this story before where I think, the Bernabeu in 2006, there was this coming of age performance from Cesc Fabregas. Yeah. I feel like these two games at a European level are kind of a coming of age moment for this iteration of Arsenal. I'm just curious as to...
Completely agree. I think I said something right itself along the lines of you need to get to a point where going to the Bernabeu isn't a big deal. And it felt like a huge deal this time, or the tie felt like a huge deal. It didn't feel such a big deal against Bayern last year because I think maybe we'd faced them in that run of Champions League disappointments.
Yeah.
And we feared them a bit because of those. I think we were still and last year it was the first year back, and we were still very much,
finding our feet.
There's probably a 10-2 scoreline somewhere over the two legs somewhere. I think actually not having gone up against Real Madrid throughout those years was probably quite good because there was no real scar tissue there.
Sure.
And also we're a year further on developed. I think the noises around the club are very different. Let's talk about Arsenal playing the badge last year against Bayern, because I do think Arsenal were a better football side than Bayern were when we played them last season. We just kind of got done by experience, and you could tell that Arsenal were quite nervy. I was at the home leg, and it was great, but it was also quite nervy. This time round, there was none of that. And what you say about coming of age performances, I think, is really, really true, because it's the reason Real Madrid are so dominant in Europe. I mean, they only won La Decima, 10 years ago, 12 years ago now? They've got those other 5 in that time. And that's because, they're one of the richest clubs in the world. They've had some of the best players in the world throughout their entire history. But there's also a kind of a routine. We've done this and we can do this. Mm-hmm. And every time you do something like that, especially if you know that this isn't going to be the first time Arsenal go there, and this is where it's really, really cool from an Arsenal fan viewpoint, is that this feels like we're still in the early stages of this era. It doesn't feel like we're at the destination yet.
Mm-hmm.
So the more times that these players can go into places like that, or for example, if Arsenal get through against PSG, I think PSG are always a little bit different just because of there's less of that historic giant aura that clubs like Real Madrid, Barcelona have.
Mm-hmm.
But that'll be another thing, Yeah. And the more that Arsenal do that, the more confidence they will have going into those games in the future, the less they will phase them. And that all counts. Experience is so key in nights like this.
Sure.
Because you also just know how to handle yourself. You know how to prep for it. You know what mindset you need to be in, what works. And, nerves are a real thing. We kind of watched we watched the Masters this week. Even for the greatest players in any sport,
sure,
nerves are still a thing. But there comes a point where no matter how talented you are, you have to kind of decide. You have to kind of decide whether you want it.
I think it. I agree. I think it's a case, that Arsenal players, the team, the squad, the manager, the staff will be thinking this morning and taking away from these two games. Listen, you take nothing for granted. There's some good teams left in this competition. They all present their own challenges. But if we can beat Real Madrid in the Champions League, we can beat anybody in the Champions League. I think that has to be the takeaway that is at the core of these two performances.
Just, I don't want to kind of impose too much on your conversation with Lewis, but one thing I would just love to throw in ahead of that is that I think it's really important as fans as well to take stock in moments like this, because everything is seemingly deliberately so temporary in football or easily dismissed. You will automatically be I've already seen it, fans being oh, I wish we could have played this Real Madrid. Well, a lot of you have, and over the years, or a lot of you have played not as good versions of them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always a kind of no matter what you achieve, there's but you have to go and do this, or what about this, or what about this?
It was like McManaman on TNT Sports last night, who was sort of, poo-pooing the Arsenal fan or the Arsenal players and the Arsenal fans celebrating that victory last night by saying, but it's only a quarter-final. You've got to go win the semi-final. Don't make it mean nothing. But, it's so reductive. Even if we don't win the Champions League this season, that doesn't mean beating Real Madrid in the way we did means nothing. It's just so... Just
let people celebrate their wins, man.
Exactly.
But one thing I would say is that I think it's worth remembering where Arsenal were just a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And I think because we've, you get quite used to good teams quite quickly. And I mentioned this on Ryan's House, but for anyone who listens to that, apologies for repeating it. But I remember distinctly having a conversation with Ian about how I wasn't sure if I would ever see Arsenal win the Premier League again in my lifetime. And that wasn't me being overly dramatic. It was me demonstrating how far away it felt at the time.
Sure.
Compared to who was winning trophies around Europe, who was winning the Champions League, who was winning the Premier League, where we were at, and just being like, we don't have that historic, like, we're not like Liverpool or Manchester United, who have had a history of winning the European Cup. And I was like, I kind of had made a peace with that. This sounds like super dramatic. I'm just talking about football. There are fucking other things going on, but in a football sense, I just
we're here for the football. It's why we're here.
I think it's worth just pausing sometimes and thinking, and just kind of acknowledging where you are. Being
sure,
sounding too mindful, but like being present and being like, hang on, this is actually just really fucking cool.
Mm-hmm.
This is really cool, and this is something that not a lot of fans or not a lot of clubs get to experience, and we really need to, this needs to give, when the next time something goes wrong, like if we draw against Ipswich, which I think that we're at the point now where no one really cares, but the next time something goes wrong, we need to not remember this, not forget this stuff, because it's really difficult to get here. Yeah. And to quote Musa Okwonga, who I do a podcast with, and you are familiar with, a good friend of yours as well. He said something the other day when we were talking about Rory McIlroy, and he just said, history's not for everyone. And that's a hell of a fucking mic drop. And I think that this side, now, we have to, I'm not getting ahead of myself, but this is a side who I genuinely believe could make history for Arsenal. They've made history, really. Third Champions League semi-final in their history is historic. I don't think they're done yet. I genuinely don't.
All right. Well, let's leave it there. I think that's a good place to wrap things up, because we're in a place where we can look back with consideration on what's got us here, but also forward with some hope and optimism about what might be still to come. Ryan, as ever, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much indeed to Ryan. You can find him on Blue Sky. He is at ryanhunn.bsky.social, at ryanhunn.bsky.social. And of course, he is the co-host of the Stadio Podcast with Musa Okwonga, which you can find in all the usual podcast places. All right, joining me now for a final little part on today's podcast. You'll know him from the Arsenal Vision podcast. It is Elliot Smith. Good afternoon, Elliot.
Goodly morning to me.
Oh, yes.
I think you'll find.
It's morning for you. It's afternoon here, which is why I'm under pressure for time to get this podcast out. For everybody who's been waiting for a post-Real Madrid podcast, which I completely understand. My apologies for making people wait, but we've had to get some things in order to get the recordings done. Before we talk about the main reason you're here, and this week it's not about your hot takes on football, I do want to give you a moment, obviously, to talk a little bit about what we saw last night from Arsenal beating Real Madrid 2-1. I don't need to ask you if you're happy or not, because I can see by the smile on your face that you are, and I can hear the smiles of everybody listening to this. But how good was that, and how impressive was that from an Arsenal perspective?
That's brilliant, isn't it? And I'm glad it's a win, not just progression, but a win. I think winning at the Bernabeu says something about our club. I think there are keystone moments in a project and in the history of a club that can help move you to the next level, Andrew, and this is one of them. When you saw Hugo Ekitike score against Spurs the other night and do the Thierry Henry knee slide, right? That iconic moment from Henry has bred generations of footballers that want to be Thierry Henry and that think of Arsenal in a certain way. And I think these kinds of nights, these kinds of performances on the biggest stage build the next generation of Arsenal supporters, of players that want to come to your club, that want to be a part of your project. I think about the first game I really saw and became aware of Arsenal, beating Newcastle in the FA Cup final. I said, wow, that was special. I want a bit of that. And here I am 27 years later, whatever it is, and it's my life. So I think it really is that big. It is that important because there is no club that is more focused on than Real Madrid. You could feel that in the social media world, just the amount of energy and enthusiasm around them. And to go to the Bernabeu, to win, to knock them out 5-1 on aggregate, I think it's a building block, not just for this project, but for the club going to another level.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, I think I've had a big, long conversation with Ryan about the game and what it means and everything else. But, we don't need to go into the ins and outs of it. But I do think it's one of those where if you have beaten Real Madrid home and away, you've got to believe that you can beat anybody in the Champions League because of their track record, their history. People have called it the Champions League juju. They have this magic in this competition. And had Arsenal come out the wrong side of these two ties, people would have said, yeah, that's about right. But, the reality is we've come through them both in very, very impressive fashion with flying colours, different performances, but both equally as good, I think. And, there's a lot of confidence to take from that as we look forward to what's still to come in Europe.
Yeah, that's how you build aura, right? You talk about Madrid's aura. This is how you build it. You knock Real Madrid out of the Champions League 5-1 on aggregate. You go to the Bernabeu and you win. And you shut up all this talk about remontada, right? Like this is how you do it. And I think the problem is you can believe you're good enough, but until you do it, you don't know for sure. And last season against Bayern Munich, the little moments didn't go our way. Maybe we weren't ready. That was a step up the ladder, right? This is the next step up the ladder. And I realize it's not mission accomplished, but these are important steps so that you can get to your ultimate goal. It's hugely impressive. I think, by the way, it is an immense validation for the manager, yet again, who deserves huge credit for always having us look prepared. If there's one thing I love about this era of Arsenal, even if it has had some disappointments, the one thing that has happened over the last few years is we arrive in the big moments prepared. We're not embarrassed. We're not outclassed. If you think about the 10-2, that was a step to get here. We had to go through that. If you think about 30 shots against Watford, that we conceded under Unai Emery, or you think about the 6-0s and some of those painful moments. Now you look at the team that has the best record against the Big Six, right, in the Premier League. You look at a team that doesn't shrink from the big moments. And I think it's a credit to Mikel that while the talented players on the pitch decide the outcome, he makes sure that they are prepared and in the right position to compete at the highest level.
100%. And let's hope that they're fully prepared for the remaining 3 games of our European season. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but we've got 2 at least, and let's make it 3.
I'm actually recording from Munich right now.
Yeah, just a touch wood. All right. Well, listen, the other reason why we wanted to talk to you today is because we want to give a little bit of profile. If people aren't already aware of the incredible fundraiser that you guys do every year at the Arsenal Vision podcast, and that we're always very happy to be part of and to support, which is raising money for the Arsenal Foundation. So if there are people out there who aren't aware of what the Arsenal Foundation are doing and what you're raising money for, give us the lowdown.
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is we've got a couple podcasts on our feed that are just about the fundraiser and just about the work being done if you really want to deep dive. I also want to say there is something called Arsenal in the Community that does brilliant work in North London. It is funded in part by local organizations and by the Premier League, so it has its funding, it's doing its great work, and that's going to carry on. Arsenal Foundation has tried to take that work and transport it to other places of need. And the place they transported it to is a refugee camp in Jordan called Zaatari Refugee Camp, one of the largest in the world. 80,000 people there, but importantly, 40,000 of them are children. And these children face immense challenges, obviously. They face challenges like gender-based violence, child labor, child marriage. I had the chance to go there. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you that it is a hard place to go to and to see what's happening there. And when you walk through this massive refugee camp and suddenly see the badge, the Arsenal badge, and a green space, and you hear something you haven't heard anywhere in the camp, laughter, playing, children who are exuberant and happy, playing football, it makes you so proud of this club. And what the program does, the Coaching for Life program that the Arsenal Foundation created, is it brings in children, boys and girls in separate facilities, teaches them football, but then has these resiliency programs where there are educators there to help give them the life skills they need to stay in the educational programs, the schools that are there in the refugee camp, to advocate for their rights. They bring the parents in and help the parents understand how they have to protect their children. And the program has even achieved gender parity. It's a hard part of the world for them to convince girls to get into these programs. They've done it. Over 5,000 children have moved through this program now and continue to. But here's the thing. Almost all of it is funded just by donations, because unlike Arsenal in the community, the Arsenal Foundation has to raise money. And I'm proud to say that this fundraiser has provided 100% of the funding for the last 3 years for this program to carry on.
Amazing.
So my attitude is there's a lot of causes. I get that. There are a million worthy causes. But our club said to care about this one. We care about it. We've made a promise to the kids. As Freddie Hudson, the head of Arsenal in the community, said, the biggest fear these children have is that the world will forget about them. And, we made a promise that we won't. And you know what? If you believe in karma, not a bad time to get some positive karma in the world, by giving and supporting kids who they will teach you what it means to love Arsenal Football Club. Let me tell you that.
Sure. It's literally life-changing stuff for these kids and for these families and for these people in that refugee camp. And, what you do by raising the awareness and raising the funds is amazing. It always is. I know that in even doing that, and people don't expect it, people want to help. And I think the generosity of your community and our community, much of which is a shared community, of course, because of the football club.
And you, Andrew, your generosity.
Well, that's, yeah.
It's important. It's important to celebrate it. Because, you do it. So
people want to help, but you also have things that you give back to people as well as a little bit of a benefit. Not benefit is the wrong word, but there are ways of getting people interested in this thing. So if people want to help, they can just help. If they want to find out, what's on offer, I'm making it sound a little bit too cynical here, but it is part of it. It's how you raise interest in these kinds of causes and get people to put their hand in their pocket. Bigger, smaller donations, every single bit helps.
No child who goes to that program says, wait, did the money come from someone who is purely altruistic or did they want to win a ticket to Arsenal? It doesn't matter. The impact is the impact. I don't have a slight problem with someone says, I'm giving £5, but I'm only giving it to try to win a ticket. Good. You just help children who need it. No problem with that whatsoever. So everyone who gives between now and the end of the weekend and who has given has a chance to win a club level midfield home leg ticket to the Champions League semifinal against PSG. You can meet Clive, who's been on your pod, who's part of our pod, for drinks before the game. You'll have free drinks at halftime, and you'll experience the game from a fantastic seat. I've had the pleasure of having that seat. It is a great one. Mm-hmm. And you'll be right there to watch us take on PSG in the first leg of the semifinal in what could be a very historic moment. So you give, you're doing good, maybe something really special in return. To your point, obviously do it just because it's the right thing. But if you want to do it to try to win the ticket, the impact is the same. And it doesn't matter how much you give, you're eligible. So, I do want to say, though, I'd be missing something if I didn't say, every year that we do this, I had that little fear. What if people just aren't energized by it? When we started this season, it was before the Real Madrid tie. And it's like, maybe there's just not a lot of energy in the community right now. It hasn't been the best domestic season. But you just have to have faith in people. And whatever you think of this moment in our world, to see over £110,000 raised as of this moment, just by people who listen to a podcast, just because the club told them to care, and for you to do this and say, hey, yeah, you can come on the pod in a big moment in our season's history and talk about this fundraiser, because that's what everyone wants to hear about. It is the kindness and the goodness of the people in this community that continues to astound me. It's an amazing feeling. So, I thank you. I thank the people who have indulged me in listening to this, who have given. It is one of those really reassuring things in a moment where it can be hard to feel reassured. It's a beautiful thing that's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I've said this before on my podcast, and when you're in a position where you're capable of helping, or you have a platform that can do some good, I think it's incumbent on you now more than ever, the royal you, right, to do that. Not just you, Elliot.
Just me.
My responsibility alone. Listen, Elliot, sort out the problems of the world, will you? Immediately, it's all down to you. But I do think it is important, and I think what you guys do is incredible. And like I said, we're happy to do our bit as well. Finally, tell people how they can donate. What they can donate, where to find everything, and how to just go through the process. Because I think, just to say, like, if you're not in a position to do that, that's fine, but if you are in a position to put your hand in your pocket and give a $5 or a 10 or 20 quid, whatever it is this month, this really is incredible work, and it goes directly to people who absolutely need it. So tell people how they do it. Yeah.
And by the way, every time we say give, in parentheses, you'll always see if you can. Right? Yeah. I know the people who can't, who would love to, and of course, only give, obviously, if you can. So you can go to our website, arsenalvisionpodcast.com. You'll see a banner that says give to the fundraiser. You can go to justgiving.com/page/AVP2025. But again, if that's hard to find, you can go to our page. You can look in the show notes of this pod, I'm sure, and find it. And one thing I do want to emphasize, it gives you different ways you can give. If you give in pounds, I think that gives you the most different payment options. But this is key. The good people at Just Giving give themselves money with your donation, or they try to. And I think they try to give themselves 15% of your donation. Here's what you do. Just make sure you click custom amount, £0. Or if you want to give Just Giving money, that'd be my guess. But I want to put that up front so no one feels like they got misled. You can customize that to 0. So you're giving 100% just to the fundraiser. But I think that's just one thing that I wish wasn't in there. I'm telling you so you can look out for it and don't get tripped up by it. All right. Well, listen, there's still a couple of weeks to go of this fundraiser. It runs throughout the month of April. I'm sure by the end of it, we'll have an incredible figure again to add to all the money that's already been raised down the years. Thank you for doing it, and thank you for being here and for taking the time to talk about it. And we'll chat football again at some other point. Can't wait. Thank you very much indeed to Elliot for giving us that insight into the fundraiser this month for the Arsenal Foundation that we are, as ever, really, really, really happy and proud to support. And you can find Elliot in all the usual social media places, assuming that you haven't already blocked him. And of course at arsenalvisionpodcast.com, from which you can find out everything you need to know about the Arsenal Vision podcast if you don't know it already. Speaking of which, as is now tradition at the end of the season, well, won't be quite the end of the season, and hopefully it's still some distance to the end of the season, we will be holding our annual live podcast. And this year we are back in the hood. We're back at Union Chapel. Full details of how you can get tickets will be made available next week. But as ever, one of the benefits of being a Patreon member at Arseblog and also Arsenal Vision is that you get advance notice to tickets. This show, in the years that we have done it, usually sells out in about 5 or 10 minutes. So there will be the majority of the tickets going on sale to our Patreon members, I think on Tuesday next week. Then there will be a small tranche of tickets available on general sale. So if you want to give yourself the best possible chance of getting a ticket and you're not already a member on Patreon, perhaps now is a good time to convince you to sign up to our Patreon. Not only do you get access to tickets, not only do you get lots of extra content, but this month in April, we donate every single penny that we make from Patreon to charity. This month, we're supporting 4 great causes. UNICEF to help kids all around the world who really badly need it. We will be supporting the Arsenal Foundation and the fundraiser that we just spoke to Elliot about. We will be supporting Oscar's Kids Ireland, a charity that does incredible work for kids who have cancer and their families, and also the Islington Food Bank, something very close to Arsenal, close to North London, and it's just $6 a month. If you can spare that, you only have to sign up for a month. If you want to leave it after that, that's fine, but know that this month in April, your subscription is going to go and help people who really, really need that help. So you can feel good and get all this extra stuff.
patreon.com/Arseblog. All the info is there. Patreon.com/Arseblog. You can sign up for a month. If you want to sign up for a year, you get a discount. I think a 10% discount on the year if you want to sign up annually as well. But all the info is there. Patreon.com/Arseblog. Right. I have to leave it there for now to make sure this podcast, goes out and gets uploaded and you can download it and you can listen to it. That's the whole thing, isn't it? So thank you very much as always for being here. I hope you enjoyed this show. I hope you enjoyed the conversations. I hope you enjoyed the nonsense music. I hope you enjoyed all of it, because it's not every week you beat Real Madrid. It's just this week and last week. Anyway, there is no end bit, by the way, at the end of this particular episode. There is no end bit because I'm pushed for time. I've got to get it out. I think the show is enjoyable enough as it is, and we can, revisit that kind of thing at a later date. Okay, this is it. This is the end. Thank you so much, as always, for being here, for listening, for downloading, for supporting everything that we do on Arseblog. Here's to 3 more fun European nights this season. For now, take it easy, folks, and we will catch you on the next one.